The Wisdom of the Trail by Jack London. Sitka Charlie had achieved the impossible. Other Indians might have known as much as the wisdom of the trail as did he, but he alone knew the white man's wisdom, the honor of the trail, and the law. But these things had not come to him in a day. The aboriginal mind is slow to generalize, and many facts repeated often are required to compass an understanding. Sitka Charlie from boyhood had been thrown continually with white men, and as a man he had elected to cast his fortunes with them, expatriating himself once and for all from his own people. Even then, respecting, almost venerating their power, and pondering over it, he had yet to define its secret essence, the honor and the law. It was only by the cumulative evidence of years that he had finally come to understand. Being an alien, when he did know, he knew it better than the white man himself. Being an Indian, he had achieved the impossible. And of these things had been bred a certain contempt for his own people, a contempt which he had made it accustomed to conceal, but which now burst forth in a polyglot whirlwind of curses upon the heads of Kachuk and Gowee. They cringed before him like a brace of snarling wolf dogs, too cowardly to spring and too wolfish to cover their fangs. They were not handsome creatures, but neither was Sitka Charlie. All three were frightful looking. There was no flesh to their faces. Their cheekbones were masked with hideous scabs which had cracked and frozen alternately under the intense frost, while their eyes burned luridly with the light which is born of desperation and hunger. Men so situated beyond the pale of the honor and the law are not to be trusted. Sitka Charlie knew this, and this was why he had forced them to abandon their rifles with the rest of the camp outfit 10 days before. His rifle and Captain Epinwell's were the only ones that remained. "Come, get a fire started," he commanded, drawing out the precious matchbox with its attendant strips of dry birch bark. The two Indians fell sullenly to the task of gathering dead branches and underwood. They were weak and paused often, catching themselves in the act of stooping, with giddy motions or staggering to the center of operations with their knees shaking like castanets. After each trip they rested for a moment, as though sick and deadly weary. At times their eyes took on the patient stoicism of dumb suffering, and again the ego seemed almost bursting forth with its wild cry, "But I want to exist," the dominant note of the whole living universe. A light breath of air blew from the south, nipping the exposed portions of their bodies and driving the frost in needles of fire through fur and flesh to the bones. So when the fire had grown lusty and thawed a damp circle in snow about it, Sitka Charlie forced his reluctant comrades to lend a hand in pitching a fly. It was a primitive affair, merely a blanket stretched parallel with the fire and to windward of it, at an angle of perhaps 45 degrees. This shut out the chill wind, and threw the heat backward and down upon those who were to huddle in its shelter. Then a layer of green spruce boughs were spread, that their bodies might not come in contact with the snow. When this task was completed, Kachuk and Gowee proceeded to take care of their feet. Their ice-bound moccasins were sadly worn by much travel, and the sharp ice of the river jams had cut them to rags. Their Siwash socks were similarly conditioned, and when these had been thawed and removed, the dead white tips of the toes, in the various stages of mortification, told their simple tale of the trail. While leaving the two to the drying of their footgear, Sitka Charlie turned back over the course he had come. He, too, had a mighty longing to sit by the fire and tend his complaining flesh, but the honor and the law forbade. He toiled painfully over the frozen field, each step a protest, every muscle in revolt. Several times where the open water between the jams had recently crusted, he was forced to miserably accelerate his movements as the fragile footing swayed and threatened beneath him. Well, in such places, death was quick and easy, but it was not his desire to endure no more. His deepening anxiety vanished as the two Indians dragged into view round a bend in the river. They staggered and panted like men under heavy burdens. Yet the packs on their backs were a matter of but a few pounds. Well, he questioned them eagerly, and the replies seemed to relieve him. He hurried on. Next came two white men, supporting between them a woman. They also behaved as though drunken, and their limbs shook with weakness. But the woman leaned lightly upon them, choosing to carry herself forward with her own strength. At sight of her, a flash of joy cast its fleeting light across Sitka Charlie's face. He cherished a very great regard for Mrs. Eppinwell. He had seen many a white woman, but this was the first to travel the trail with him. When Captain Eppinwell proposed the hazardous undertaking and made him an offer for his services, he had shaken his head gravely, for it was an unknown journey through the dismal vastness of the Northland, and he knew it to be the kind that would try the uttermost of the souls of men. But when he learned that the captain's wife was to accompany them, he had refused flatly to have anything further to do with it. Had it been a woman of his own race, he would have harbored no objections. But these women of the Southland? No. They were too soft, too tender for such enterprises. Sitka Charlie did not know this kind of woman. 5 minutes before, he did not even dream of taking charge of the expedition. But when she came to him with her wonderful smile and her straight, clean English, and talked to the point without pleading or persuading, he had incontinently yielded. Had there been a softness and appeal to mercy in the eyes, a tremble to the voice, or a taking advantage of sex, he would have stiffened to steel. Instead, her clear searching eyes and clear ringing voice, her utter frankness and tacit assumption of equality, had robbed him of his reason. He felt then that this was a new breed of woman, and ere they'd been trailmates for many days, he knew why the sons of such women mastered the land and the sea, and why the sons of his own womankind could not prevail against them. Tender and soft. Day after day he watched her, muscle-weary and exhausted, indomitable, and the words beat upon him in a perennial refrain. Tender and soft. He knew her feet had been born to easy paths and sunny lands, strangers to the moccasined pain of the north, unkissed by the chill lips of the frost, and he watched and marveled at them twinkling ever through the weary day. She'd always a smile and a word of cheer, from which not even the meanest packer was excluded. As the way grew darker, she seemed to stiffen and gather greater strength, and when Kachuk and Gohi, who had bragged that they knew every landmark of the way as a child, did the skin bales of the teepee, acknowledged that they knew not where they were, it was she who raised a forgiving voice amid the curses of the men. She had sung to them that night till they felt the weariness fall from them and were ready to face the future with fresh hope. And when the food failed and each scant stint was measured jealously, it was she who rebelled against the machinations of her husband and Sitka Charlie, and demanded and received a share neither greater nor less than that of the others. Sitka Charlie was proud to know this woman. A new richness, a greater breadth, had come into his life with her presence. Hitherto he'd been his own mentor, and had turned to right or left at no man's beck. He had molded himself according to his own dictates, nourished his manhood regardless of all save his own opinion. For the first time he'd felt a call from without for the best that was in him. Just a glance of appreciation from the clear searching eyes, a word of thanks from the clear ringing voice, just a slight wreathing of the lips in the wonderful smile, and he walked with the gods for hours to come. It was a new stimulant to his manhood. For the first time he thrilled with a conscious pride in his wisdom of the trail, and between the twain they ever lifted the sinking hearts of their comrades. The faces of the two men and the woman brightened as they saw him, for after all he was the staff they leaned upon. But Sitka Charlie, rigid as was his wont, concealing pain and pleasure impartially beneath an iron exterior, asked them the welfare of the rest, told the distance to the fire, and continued on the back trip. Next he met a single Indian, unburdened and limping, lips compressed and eyes set with the pain of a foot in which the quick fought a losing battle with the dead. All possible care had been taken of him, but in the last extremity the weak and unfortunate must perish, and Sitka Charlie deemed his days to be few. The man could not keep up for long, so he gave him rough, cheering words. After that came two more Indians to whom he had allotted the task of helping along Joe, the third white man of the party. Well, they had deserted him. Sitka Charlie saw at a glance the lurking spring of their bodies, and knew they had at last cast off his mastery. So he was not taken unawares when he ordered them back in quest of their abandoned charge, and saw the gleam of the hunting knives that they drew from their sheaths. A pitiful spectacle, 3 weak men lifting their puny strength in the face of the mighty vastness. But the two recoiled under the fierce rifle blows of the one, and returned like beaten dogs to the leash. 2 hours later, with Joe reeling between them and Sitka Charlie bringing up the rear, they came to the fire, where the remainder of the expedition crouched in the shelter of the fly. "A few words, my comrades, before we sleep," Sitka Charlie said, after they had devoured their slim rations of unleavened bread. He was speaking to the Indians in their own tongue, having already given the import to the whites. "A few words, my comrades, for your own good, that ye may yet perchance live. I shall give you the law. On his own head be the death of him that breaks it. We have passed the hills of silence, and we now travel to the head reaches of the Stewart. It may be one sleep, it may be several, it may be many sleeps, but in time we shall come among the men of the Yukon, who have much grub. It were well that we looked to the law. Today Kachuk and Gohi, whom commanded to break trail, forgot they were men, and like frightened children ran away. True, they forgot. So let us forget. But hereafter let them remember, if it should happen, they do not." He touched the rifle carelessly and grimly. "Tomorrow they shall carry the flour and see that the white man Joe does not lie down by the trail. The cups of flour are counted. Should so much as an ounce be wanting at nightfall. Well, do you understand? Today there are others that forgot. Moosehead and Three Salmon left the white man Joe to lie in the snow. Let them forget no more. With the light of day shall they go forth and break trail. Ye have heard the law. Look well, yes, lest you break it." Sitka Charlie found it beyond him to keep the line close up. From Moosehead and the Three Salmon, who broke trail in advance, to Kachuk, Gohi, and Joe, it straggled out over a mile. Each staggered, fell, or rested as he saw fit. The line of march was a progression through a chain of irregular halts. Each drew upon the last remnant of his strength and stumbled onward till it was expended, but in some miraculous way there was always another last remnant. Well, each time a man fell, it was with the firm belief that he would rise no more. Yet he did rise, and again, and again. The flesh yielded and the will conquered, but each triumph was a tragedy. The Indian with the frozen foot, no longer erect, crawled forward on hand and knee. He rarely rested, for he knew the penalty exacted by the frost. Even Mrs. Eppingwell's lips were at last set in a stony smile, and her eyes, seeing, saw not. Often she stopped, pressing a mittened hand to her heart, gasping and dizzy. Joe, the white man, had passed beyond the stage of suffering. He no longer begged to be let alone and prayed to die, but was soothed and content under the anodyne of delirium. Kachuk and Gohi dragged him on roughly, venting upon him many a savage glance or blow. To them it was the acme of injustice. Their hearts were bitter with hate and heavy with fear. Why should they cumber their strength with this weakness? To do so meant death. Not to do so? Well, they remembered the law of Sitka Charlie and the rifle. Joe fell with greater frequency as the daylight waned, and so hard was he to raise that they dropped farther and farther behind. Sometimes all three pitched into the snow, so weak that the Indians become. Yet on their backs was life, and strength, and warmth. Within the flour sacks were all the potentialities of existence. They could not but think of this, and it was not strange that which came to pass. They had fallen by the side of a great timber jam where 1,000 cords of firewood waited the match. Near by was an air hole through the ice. Kachuk looked on the wood and the water, as did Gohi. Then they looked on each other. Never a word was spoken. Gohi struck a fire, and Kachuk filled a tin cup with the water and heated it. Joe babbled of things in another land, in a tongue they did not understand. They mixed flour with the warm water till it was a thin paste, and of this they drank many cups. They did not offer any to Joe, but he did not mind. He didn't mind anything. Not even his moccasins, which scorched and smoked among the coals. A crystal mist of snow fell about them softly, caressingly, wrapping them in clinging robes of white. And their feet would have yet trod many trails had not destiny brushed the clouds aside and cleared the air. Nay, 10 minutes' delay would have been salvation. Sitka Charlie, looking back, saw the pillared smoke of their fire and guessed. He looked ahead at those who were faithful and at Mrs. Eppingwell. "So, my good comrades, ye have again forgotten that you were men. Good. Very good. There will be fewer bellies to feed." Sitka Charlie retired the flour as he spoke, strapping the pack to one on his own back. He kicked Joe till the pain broke through the poor devil's bliss and brought him doddering to his feet. Then he shoveled him out upon the trail and started him on his way. The 2 Indians attempted to slip off. "Hold, Gohi! And thou too, Kachuk. Hath the flower given such strength to thy legs that they may outrun the swift-winged lead? Think not to cheat the law. Be men for the last time, and be content that ye die full-stomached. Come, step up, back to the timber, shoulder to shoulder. Come. The two men obeyed quietly and without fear, for it is the future which presses upon the man and not the present. Thou go he hast a wife and children and a deerskin lodge in the Chippewan. What is thy will in the matter? Give thou her of the goods which are mine by the word of the captain, the blankets, the beads, the tobacco, the box which makes the strange sounds after the manner of white men. Say that I did die on the trail, but say not how. Well, and thou, Kachut, who hast nor wife nor child? Well, mine is a sister, the wife of the factor at Kashim. He beats her, and she's not happy. Give thou her the goods which are mine by the contract, and tell her it were well she go back to her own people. Shouldst thou meet the man and be so minded, it were a good deed that he should die. He beats her, and she is afraid. Are ye content to die by the law? We are. Well, then goodbye, my good comrades. May ye sit by the well-filled pot and warm lodges ere the day is done. As he spoke, he raised his rifle, and many echoes broke the silence. Hardly had they died away when other rifles spoke in the distance. Sitka Charlie started. There had been more than one shot, yet there was but one other rifle in the party. He gave a fleeting glance at the men who lay so quietly, smiled viciously at the wisdom of the trail, and hurried on to meet the men of the Yukon.